So the book of Ezekiel that we're looking at tonight, Ezekiel here, you can see from the chart, was in with Daniel during the time of the sort of first attacks from the Babylonians onto into Jerusalem. And so you remember, as I said before, there were a number of attacks that went on until finally in 586 they absolutely destroyed the temple, destroyed the city, and took everybody, pretty much away. At least all the rest of them. But there were a couple of attacks before that where they would take off some of the leaders into exile, and you'll see here that Ezekiel, he starts in Jerusalem. He starts with the kingdom of Judah, but he's one of the first that gets taken off as a young man into exile into Babylon, um, or by the Babylonians, when similar to Daniel and then finally Jeremiah. But Ezekiel went with one of those on the first attack that happened. So he spent, his and the writing as it is from Daniel is from exile. But let's have a look at the book together. So he was a priest, or he was training to be a priest, at least, living in Jerusalem. As I said, he was taken to Babylon with the first wave of the exiles. So Jerusalem and the temple was still there, but the Babylonians came in and then they took away some of the leadership into exile and left a lot of the people behind to encourage them to kind of behave themselves, but they kept on misbehaving, and finally they revolted against Babylon because of all the taxes and everything, the tribute that they had to pay. And they then the Babylonians came down and finally attacked and destroyed the whole city and so on, that we know from the story. So he begins his prophetic ministry where he's age 30. He's been in Babylon for 5 years, or near Babylon. And age 30 is significant for the Jews because that's the age where you kind of turn into full adulthood. And so that was the age that they kind of recognized that you would start your ministry and start. So that was the age he was looking to become a kind of a priest in the temple and so on. But of course, he's taken into exile. Similar, which is why Jesus was 30 years of age when he began his ministry. It was the age where you could become a rabbi, the age where, you would kind of chart your own way forwards and so on. Anyway, the outline is quite interesting because you got the commissioning at the start, the first three chapters, and then you've got three sections of judgment: judgment against Israel from 4 to 24, judgment against the nations from 25 to 32, and then the judgment on Jerusalem is specifically in chapter 33. But then coupled with that, like many of the prophetic books, you've got hope. So you've got the hope for Israel, the hope for the nations, and then the hope, the final chapters, the hope for all creation. And we'll see how this kind of unfolds as we kind of have a brief look through it. But there's those three areas of judgment on Israel, and then it expands to the nations, and then comes down to Jerusalem, and then the hope for Israel, the nations, and then for all creation to finish with. But Ezekiel starts the book with this really weird kind of vision of God's chariot. Basically, he sees kind of God sitting on this kind of platform that has wheels all around it. Some people have tried to depict it. Some think it must have looked something like this, where there's these wheels within the wheels, and there's these winged creatures with four different heads, and so on, and they're kind of moving God's chariot, who's sitting on the throne above it, in any kind of direction they want. And this is kind of like a picture of the chariot where God kind of moves around, if you like, on earth. And they have this. The imagery is similar, as I said, to Mount Sinai and the tabernacle. When God comes down, there's rainbows around him. There's kind of like the brilliant light and so on, and the temple, and it's that picture of God filling the atmosphere around with the awesomeness of who God is. And in chapter 1, verse 28, towards the end of this vision, he says it was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So when he sees the throne and the kind of person that's sitting on the throne, this is what he says. It's like the significance of the Lord, and this is something that he kind of gazes upon. But it kind of throws up this question as to here he is in Babylon. So what is God doing in Babylon? Because God in their understanding was that God would just reside in his temple. That's why the temple was built. The temple is still there in Jerusalem. So, what is God actually doing in Babylon? And why are we not seeing this picture in Jerusalem as we used to under, when Solomon built the temple and during the tabernacle years and the years of wandering, God was there amongst his people. And now what's he doing over here in Babylon in the enemy, basically? And it throws out all these kind of questions as to, well, has God abandoned the people of Israel? He's not there anymore. Like, what is really going on? And notice also that he's called in chapter one to be a prophet and not a priest. So he's trained for the priesthood, but God comes on him and he's now says to him, "You're going to be my." Or in beginning of chapter two, he says, "You're going to be my spokesperson, my prophet to the people of Israel. You need to say what I tell you to say, and do what I tell you to do." And so God takes him and gives him a different role than the role that he had actually been training for. And when he's like the other prophets that we've seen through the Old Testament, he's no different in many ways. But he's told to tell the people two things: one, that they've been worshiping other gods, that they've kind of taken on board the gods of the nations around them, which God sort of forbade them to do, and it's the greatest insult, really, to God that they would do that. And they've also neglected the justice for the people around them. So there's no social justice. So they're extorting people. They're allowing the poor to, just basically kind of fend for themselves, and they're not doing the things that God told them to do. So they're not following in the way of the covenant that they agreed to follow. And so God becomes very disgruntled with them, very angry with them, and there is a time of judgment, which is what we see. And then we see Ezekiel, he's called not just to speak to the people in words, but to kind of act out. And there's this bizarre chapters of kind of the signs that God shows him to do. So he's got to show it in front of the people. So his actions will be the kind of the story or the kind of the image that the people need to see. And so he's told to build this model of Jerusalem, and then he builds this kind of little mud model of Jerusalem, and then he lays it under siege because Jerusalem is going to be kind of under siege, and then it gets destroyed. He's told even more bizarrely to kind of be like the scapegoat of Israel, to lie on his side for 390 days, and then he's told then afterwards to lie on his other side for 90 days. And that is a kind of a picture of him bearing the sins of Israel and then the sins of Judah. Just like the hands were laid on the scapegoat, we remember in the tabernacle years, while they were wandering in the wilderness, and they would cast the scapegoat out. So he was almost told to do this kind of punishment, in a sense, on behalf of the people of Israel, to show how serious their sins were. And what he was supposed to eat during all this kind of 2 years or so of doing this was he had to make bread enough, and he was supposed to make it over human excrement. You remember in the account that he kind of said, "No, I'm not going to do that," and so God kind of said, "Well, you can use cow's manure," which I'm not sure is a great improvement, really, when you cook your bread over cow's manure. But that's what he had to do to kind of symbolize the sinfulness and the kind of the low point in which the people of Israel had now kind of descended, and so on. In another kind of enactment out to the people, he had to take his hair and shave all his hair off his head and his beard and everything, which was a symbol of real judgment and a symbol of shame for himself. And then he had to cut it up and so on. So there's these kind of really strange things that he was asked to do by God, and because he was doing it and he would do it in front of the people, it was like a symbol to them of what was going to happen and how upset God was with them. And to make matters worse, kind of in a sense, for poor old Ezekiel, that God tells him that actually you're going to do all these things and no one's going to pay any notice to you at all. They're not actually going to listen. So I don't know how he managed to carry on going through with it because God said, that their hearts are so hard, they're such a rebellious people that you're going to send all these warnings to them of what's going to happen, and nobody's going to take any notice of you. But I want you to do it anyway. And so he's obedient to what God tells him to do, even in spite of the kind of ridicule and the kind of ignoring that the people ignore him in doing it, just as Moses said in Deuteronomy 30, that the people they were hard and stiff-necked people, and they're going to break the covenant and so on, and not listen. And so Ezekiel still does it anyway and warns them. And then we have in 6 and 7 a couple of oracles, a couple of poems and warnings about the mountains of Israel and exile, that they're going to be taken out of the land and they're going to be taken into exile. And then we have this amazing vision. So Ezekiel, he's given all these warnings, and then God takes him and he takes him really on a virtual tour of Jerusalem. So here he is in Babylon, but God kind of lifts him onto that chariot of his and he whisks him off kind of spiritually, I guess, into Jerusalem. And he kind of sees the temple. He sees what God sees. He sees what the people are up to in Jerusalem. And he sees people worshiping other gods inside and outside of the temple. So they have included Yahweh as just one of the gods that they're going to worship. And so he sees them worshiping Yahweh and then coming out the temple and starting bowing down to the sun and so on. Um, and he just sees the kind of level to which the people have kind of descended in their half-heartedness, maybe not even half-hearted, but in their reaction to God. And then God gets him back on the chariot and leaves Jerusalem and goes with Ezekiel back to Babylonia, and goes there, and he just kind of summarizes it by saying that the people's sin and their covenant violations have become so extreme that God says, I've left my temple and I'm going to go. And this is the picture of him with his kind of chariot with the floating in the air and so on. That he's gone into exile with the people because there is no hope left for his people back in Israel. And so God has left with the exiles, and he's with them more than he is with his own people in his own house, in a sense, in his own temple back in Jerusalem. But with that, there is always a voice of hope. And in Ezekiel 11, he says this from verse 16 to 25. He says, therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Although I sent them far away among the nations and scattered them among the countries, yet for a little while I have been a sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone. So this is like words that marry up with the picture of God being on his chariot with Ezekiel in exile. Therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, I will gather you from the nations and bring you back from the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you back the land of Israel again. They will return to it and remove all its vile images and detestable idols. I will give them an undivided heart and put a new spirit in them. I will remove from them their heart of stone and give them a heart of flesh. Then they will follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. They will be my people, and I will be their God. Just a critical part there that God's going to give them a new heart, give them a new desire to want to follow him. And the verse that or the sentence that in some ways summarizes the whole of scripture is that last bit, they will be my people and I will be their God. That's God's desire, that we will be his people. He will be our God, and we will follow him with a heart that desires to follow him, not because of the rules or the regulations or without that devotion from our heart, but that we will follow him with a full heart and follow him with all of our will and so on. Verse 21, but as for those whose hearts are devoted to their vile images and detestable idols, I will bring down on their own heads what they have done, declares the sovereign Lord. Then the cherubim with the wheels beside them spread their wings, and the glory of the Lord God of Israel was above them. The glory of the Lord went up from within the city and stopped above the mountain east of it. The Spirit lifted me up and brought me to the exiles in Babylonia in the vision given by the Spirit of God. Then the vision I had seen went up from me, and I told the exiles everything the Lord has shown me. So you can imagine the joy, I guess, from the exiles, from what they've seen, coupled with the disappointment and the yeah, the just the hopelessness of what Ezekiel has been shown about the people that are back home and how they, are continuing to disobey God, which was the reason why these people were taken into exile in the first place. So you see that there are the kind of the both sides are kind of together again. You have the judgment of God because the time has now come where he's left his temple because it's just become so corrupt. It's become such a shambolic image of him in the land where the people of Israel were supposed to be the people that would show everybody else what it means to follow God and who God is, and that he is Yahweh, the king above all kings. He is the God above all gods, but they have just kind of followed all the gods that they want to follow, and they're not true to him and not true to their covenant. But always with judgment comes hope in the Bible. And there is a hope of a future, a hope of a return, a hope that we will be transformed in some way so that we can actually follow the covenant that we've agreed with God, and that God will be God and we will be God's people. Then there is a judgment on Israel that they use these kind of allegories in chapters 12 to 24. He kind of uses a picture of a burnt vine, adulterous wife, two eagles and a vine, dangerous lion, promiscuous couple of promiscuous sisters, just to kind of use all these images that he brings to them to say how much they have fallen and how bad that they have become, and that judgment is just on them because this is what they are like. This is what other people see of them. And is in the midst of that, Ezekiel kind of acts like a lawyer. So he kind of gives these pictures and say, "This is you," and that actually then he says, "Well, because of that, Jerusalem's destruction is deserved. It's not because God wants to punish you. It's because you have kind of made these decisions that have led down into this place, and you've now reached the point of no return." That there comes a moment where God says, "That's enough is enough. You have gone so far, and I'm not going to let you go any further and just continue this behavior and this, in a sense, abomination towards God and towards the covenant." And so that's it. There is a line. So God is, long suffering and merciful, but there is always a point where God goes, "That's enough," and now it's time for change and for a different approach. And so God's character demands both justice for the people's actions, but it also, as I said, always has that hope and that opportunity for transformation and change as well, because God is faithful and He never gives up on His people. I just kind of put this in now because this is sort of where it comes. But somebody asked me to kind of just mention this because when they were reading Ezekiel, they said that, in Ezekiel 18:20, it says this: the one who sins is the one who will die. Actually talks about it in the whole chapter. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. The righteousness of the righteous will be credited to them, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against them. But you remember back in Exodus and so on, there are passages in the law which says in Exodus like 34 verse 7, which is one of them, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. And the question was, well, how can both be true? If God punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents, and yet in Ezekiel, as well as in other places, it says that actually God will only punish you for your sin and the sin of the parents and the grandparents, and that doesn't, you don't have to carry that. So, how can both be true? It's important where you find these kind of conflicts in the scripture to kind of wrestle with it and go, well, it can't be one is right and the other is wrong because this is the word of God. And so therefore we have to try and figure out, first of all, what they really mean, and then try and understand it and go, well, how can this kind of marry together in some way? What is it really saying? And when you actually look into it, in Exodus 34, verse 7, actually, it's not a brilliant translation in the NIV, to be honest. It says, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. But that second, the one that I've underlined, the punishes there, actually really means visits. It's not the same as yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. It's not the opposite of that. And really, what it's saying is that when we sin, it has far-reaching consequences. That when we sin, it can affect future generations. We see that in kind of medical things sometimes, where if we become alcoholics, then or drug users, then often our children uh, follow in a similar kind of vein to the vein of the parents and so on. And you find families where it kind of goes down through the generations. And that is really what is the generational sin is really talking about. It's not that, if my father has made a mistake and has sinned, that I have to bear that. But there are ways in which as individuals, that what we do has an impact on our children, and then if they follow it, it has an impact on their children, and so it continues through different generations. And so we have to recognize that sin is not just about me and God or me and other people. Sometimes it has consequences through different generations because they follow a similar pattern of living against the will of God. But equally, I guess on the positive side is that if we have an opportunity to break that with Christ and with the Holy Spirit, but also we have an opportunity to do the opposite, which is to be a really good example for our children and the next generations and the next generations and so on. And in the same way that the kind of the evil and the negative can go through the generations, so can the positive as well. And so I just kind of threw that in there as an aside. Going back to the kind of the passage and the overall picture of the book, the judgment then switches from Israel to the nations in chapters 25 to 32. And he first judges the smaller nations around Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia, and then the more two powerful nations who Judah aligned themselves with when they went against Babylonia, which was Tyre and Sidon and Egypt. And I've got a kind of a picture there of the map where you can kind of see. So from the bottom on the right there, you've got Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and then Philistia, where the kind of Sinai is and so on, and where Gaza is now part of Philistia. And then you've got the two big kind of powerhouses of Egypt down to the kind of south west, and you've got Tyre and Sidon, which were really quite strong militarily as well as economically because of their location. They were major, major trading areas. and on the Mediterranean Sea. So they made a lot of money through trade and so on, and built up quite impressive castles and ramparts and armies and so on. Particularly their navies were very strong, and so you've got those two, and you've got little Israel and Judah right in the middle, and then if they didn't like Babylonia, then they would try and instead of give their money away to Babylonia in tribute, they tried to buy the help of Egypt and Tyre and Sidon, but the Babylonians came in and crushed them all. So that's where these judgments on the nations come. And it really is saying that God will hold all of these countries, all of these nations accountable because of their prowess, because Babylonia at that time hadn't overtaken these other nations. They then, elevated themselves, particularly their kings, who called themselves gods, because they thought they could stand against the Babylonian might, and that God says, "No, I'm going to bring Babylon back, and they're going to be my instruments of judgment, and you will be humbled because of this." And Israel shouldn't, in a sense, side with you because it's going to go down with you if it does that. And then we have this kind of desperate chapter where, first of all, Ezekiel is called to be a watchman to look at the spiritual happenings of what's going on around him, and then he sees this refugee coming from Jerusalem who tells him that the city has fallen, that the temple is now destroyed, and that there is kind of no hope anymore. And in a sense, that's the kind of pivotal chapter at the end of these judgments, that judgment has now come and Israel is now fully in exile because there is no city, there is no temple. God has left, and everything is kind of fallen apart and has been destroyed. But as I said, it goes then into hope, and the hope for Israel comes straight afterwards. In chapters 34 to 37, first the hope is that he will raise a new David. He said, "I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will make a covenant of peace with them and rid the land of savage beasts, so that they may live in the wilderness and sleep in the forests in safety. I will make them and the places surrounding my hill a blessing. I will send down showers in season. There will be showers of blessing." And he carries on, and it reminds us of the Abrahamic covenant of God bringing, these are going to be my people, and I will bless them so that they will be a blessing. It reminds us of the blessings and curses in Deuteronomy 28, where they will follow the covenant and God will be amongst them and God will bless them with the rain when they need it, and abundance in their harvests and abundance in their homes and everything else, and that God will look after them. And he carries on in chapter 36. He said, "I'm not only going to put David there, a new kind of David in front of you, but he says, I will give you a new heart." So we saw this earlier, "and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Then you will live in the land I gave your ancestors. You will be my people, and I will be your God." And there's that passage again, oh, that saying again. But God's going to not only, put a new leader, he's going to transform the hearts of all the people. So there is a future hope for Israel when they return, that they won't go back into exile because there'll be a different kind of people than the ones that caused the exile in the first place. And then straight after that, you get that amazing chapter of the Valley of the Dry Bones that we all kind of know in chapter 37, where he's taken in his vision to see this kind of wasteland of just bones of skeletons and so on, and he's told to prophesy, and and he sees these bones then becoming, being knit together with sinews and so on, and with muscles, and then flesh goes on it, and then he's told to breathe and call for the breath of the Spirit to breathe into these lifeless bodies that then come back to life. And it's a picture again of the Spirit of God breathing into us as he created us from the dust of the ground in Genesis chapter 2. So it's like new creation coming back into the people, just carrying on that picture of, what he said in a new heart and a new spirit within us. And even though we have rebelled and we brought this death and this separation from God on ourselves, but God doesn't leave us there. He brings new life into us and new hope into us. And an amazing chapter with the Valley of the Dry Bones. And then he goes from Israel, he expands it to the hope for the nations. And he talks about how evil is kind of personified through this king, Gog, who is the leader of the people of Magog. They people of Magog come from Japheth, who's one of the sons of Noah, from Genesis 10 and the Table of the Nations, if you want to look it up. Kind of a European kind of people group, and that there is this evil is personified as the leader Gog, which is just a name that's there, and that Gog will rise up against the people of Israel and come at the people of Israel to try and defeat them. But God will send different kinds of judgment on the nations, and he will finally defeat human evil Gog, and he will bring in a new creation and a new world order. And so you have this kind of hope for the nations that God will, yes, judge them. There will be a rebellion, but that's not the end of the story. And that there will be a new hope for the nations outside of Israel, and that evil will be done away with, and there will be peace and there will be prosperity for everyone. And then the book closes with these last chapters, which describe a hope for all creation in a new temple and a new city. And it goes into great detail, like it did in the Old Testament with the building of Solomon's temple and all the dimensions and so on, like it did for the tabernacle, because this is going to be the place that God resides in. And so it says it's this long and this wide and so on, and this is how it's going to look, and these are the people, and it's even more splendid than even Solomon's temple. And the question that people have been debating for years is this a literal temple, like we see for in the book of Daniel, that's going to come back and they're going to rebuild the temple and so on? Or is this purely a sort of a symbolic picture, like some of the other pictures in the book of Ezekiel? And there's been a lot of debate on both sides. Some think it's going to be a literal temple that's going to look like this when the people of Israel return. Other people think it's more symbolic. But either way, it describes how God's presence returns to the temple, and that God will be there amongst his people. And out of that, there's this picture of this beautiful picture of the river flowing out into the desert, into a place where there is death and there is nothing there. And as it flows in, it brings trees and life and animals and everything else. And it's a picture of kind of a new Eden that comes into a world that is desolate and is kind of dry spiritually. God will bring this new life into all kind of areas and into all places. And it closes with the name of the city, Yahweh Shema, which means the Lord is there. And that it kind of implies that God's going to be there permanently, and this is going to be his abiding presence with all the people. And so the book of Ezekiel finishes on this tremendous hope for the future, that all creation will be blessed because God will be back on earth residing in his temple, and that everybody will be blessed. And so the Abrahamic covenant and the Davidic covenant, all those covenants will be fulfilled at this time, where God will bring his blessing to all people. So in a nutshell, that's the kind of the amazing book of Ezekiel, where here he is in exile. Here he is where they think that there is no hope at all, and yet God brings these amazing messages of hope and future for the people and for the whole world through these visions and the things that Ezekiel is shown and then passes on to us.